All right. Hey guys, welcome to Politically Provoked, the interactive podcast where we host debates, panels, and interviews. I'm your host, Brittany. I'm here with my co host, Todd. How are you?
Doing great, Britt.
Okay, I'm doing good. And our moderator tonight, Justin, how are you?
I am doing excellent. How are you, Britt?
Doing good. All right. So we are going to be debating the Russia-Ukraine stuff finally. So this is we haven't really talked much about it on our show. We have two people from very, very opposing sides. Even on their Twitter, one has the Ukrainian flag, one has the Russian flag. It's going to be fun. So we're going to be doing with Richard Spencer and Haas Infrared. So why don't we bring on our guests? First up, why don't we bring on Haas, Justin? Hey, so yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
I'm Haas from the InfraredShow. I'm a Marxist-Leninist.
You're muted.
Fuck. I'm Haas. I'm part of a media collective called the Infrared Show. We're Marxist-Leninists, and we call ourselves Marxist-Leninists in the age of multipolarity in the post-COVID world. So we don't have that much in common with Western Marxist-Leninists. We're trying to build a new thing, basically. And yeah.
All right, well, thanks for joining us. And next up, let's bring on Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Spencer. I'm an advocate of unipolarity Trotskyism. So this should be quite a debate. No, I'm not an advocate of Trotsky. I think unipolarity has gone out the window. Haas and I might actually agree on that. But I am who I am. I don't want to attach any label to what I think. You can take my words for what they are.
Okay, great. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Each person can give an opening statement, can be as little as 1 minute, no longer than 5, about the topic and your stance. After that, we'll open up the floor. We will go into Q&A at the end of the debate. If you guys have questions, tag Politically Provoked who your questions addressed to. We also have, you can send super chats through powerchat.live/politicallyprovoked. And we will read those at the end. We're not going to interrupt the debate. Right now, we're on Odyssey, DLive, Trovo, Facebook. We are not streaming on Twitch. We're not doing our debates on Twitch, but we're obviously not on YouTube since we lost our YouTube. So that's where you can find us. All right. So yeah, why don't we get started with opening statements? Richard, you want to get us going?
Sure. Well, we live in interesting times. That is for sure. The continent is furiously rearming itself. There has never been, perhaps even in my life, certainly in the past 30 years, there has never been such unity in NATO. There is actually a remarkable amount of unity in the United States with regard to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We are entering a new realm. And I think the best way to describe it is that we are re-entering the 20th century. The so-called unipolar moment that was announced by Charles Krauthammer, you can think of it as the end of history or anything like that, is giving way to what I think will be a bifurcated world. It will be a different type of bifurcated world than the 20th century, but there will actually be a lot of similarities. I do ultimately think this is a good thing in many ways, and I can go through that later. But actually, I'm going to do something that might be a little bit unusual in the sense that I am going to grant Russia has real interest in this conflict. I think particularly in the American media sphere, there's a tendency to moralize and to talk about poor little Ukraine. They're just being attacked for no reason, and every sovereign nation deserves to make its own decisions. Well, I guess that's true in some way, but it's very naive. The fact is, from Russia's standpoint, and I do think this describes Putin's perspective on matters, there is no Russian security without Ukraine. So it's not just a matter of NATO expansion, which has happened in fits and starts since the end of the Cold War. It is Ukraine in particular. Obviously, Ukraine has tremendous historical ties with Russia. Kiev and Moscow are foundations of the empire. Lots of linguistic ties, genetic ties. I mean, they are very similar people, of course. But I think there's a geostrategic element to Ukraine that makes it actually unique. Russia feels that it can be encircled, and Russia can, in fact, fall if there isn't a bastion in Ukraine to stop this. Most recently, the German army during the Second World War marched across Ukraine towards the Caspian. From the Russian standpoint, that is simply a no-go. This cannot happen. So I do think that there is a kind of danger of NATO expansion. Obviously, Russia doesn't like that, understandably. But I think there is a unique geostrategic quality about Ukraine. Now, I think Russia and the United States and NATO are kind of in a bit of a prisoner's dilemma, I guess you could say, regarding this, in the sense that Washington knows how important Ukraine is to Russia. Russia has said explicitly how important it is. And it's a kind of like, who goes first? Should we expand? There are certainly people in Washington who want to see a diminished Russia, no doubt. But Russia has decided, for whatever reason, to basically take it all. This is not about supporting Donbass. This is not about a humanitarian intervention to prevent Nazis or some nonsense like that. This is an attempt to take the whole thing and return us to the 20th century. The good thing about this is that this reinvigorates NATO. This is the original purpose of NATO. It is an anti-Russian alliance. I think it's also going to inspire a lot of self-reflection on the West. The past 30 years, culturally speaking, have been horrifying from my perspective in America and the Western world. This new sense of danger and even possible world war and even a possible annihilation is going to encourage the West to rethink itself. It's going to encourage it to rearm, as it clearly has been, in a remarkable speed. So re-entering the 20th century, and I ultimately think that is a very good thing. And this has reinvigorated European unification. It's reinvigorated NATO. And I think it's going to reinvigorate an identity upon people like myself who live in the West and identify with the West. There it is.
Thank you. Paz.
There's no evidence that Russia's goal is to simply take all of Ukraine, or even, we don't even know if they want to take any part of Ukraine, actually. I mean, as far as the status of the Donbass republics, we can assume they're probably going to have a referendum and they're going to go the way of Crimea. But it's clear to me that Russia is attacking Ukrainian cities in the west, Kharkiv and Kiev, outside of the parameter of the Donbass, because they're getting to the root cause of the civil war in the east of Ukraine, and they're getting to the root cause of Ukrainian aggression against the people of the Donbass. Russia does not want an anti-Russian government in Ukraine in general. They're looking past the specifics that was the straw that broke the camel's back as to why they're doing this, which is, again, because of Ukraine's attacks against the newly recognized Donetsk and Lugansk republics. And they're going to the root cause of why is there a conflict like this in the first place. They're challenging the legitimacy of the 2014 Maidan coup, and Russia's goals seem pretty clear to me. They're not there to occupy Ukraine or annex all of it. Now, if you think denazifying Ukraine and ensuring that Ukraine is neutral and it's not going to have an anti-Russian orientation, that this amounts to taking it, then I guess you're right. But I don't think this has anything in common with the outright blanket territorial annexations of the 20th century. Finally, just as a quick remark on the second point, I think here we can find a common agreement. I do think that the West is finding a new kind of identity, and I think you are probably one of the best figureheads for the new identity that the liberal West is now adopting as it's unifying against Russia, right? I think there is a kind of fusion going on between neoconservatism on the one hand and, kind of so-called left-wing progressivism on the other hand of Bernie Sanders and AOC. And I think from this fusion, we are going to have the revival of National Socialism in the West. And it's going to have all of the qualities of Germany's ad hoc kind of territorial designs and aggression against other states, Lebensraum and all this kind of stuff. So I do think you adequately represent that. To me,
Thank you.
yeah. So it seems very clear to me that there's a problem with this, though. The problem is that Russia does not just represent Russia or Russian interests, and the Western elites that are leading the charge for this new kind of consolidation don't simply represent the West. There's a more fundamental global division going on right now between the forces of global populism, the peoples of the world, more or less, and this kind of Davos agenda of Anglo-Saxon globalism. So even within the United States, we are not Germany, we're not Europe. Here, 50% of people are skeptical of the prevailing narrative about what's going on in Ukraine. Here, we have an association of Biden and his agenda with the enemy of the American people. Here, we have provided a base of operations with which things like the truckers' movement in Canada could reach success. So within the West, there is going to be resistance against this new, globalistic Nazism, if you want to call it that. This global liberal George Soros paradox of tolerance Nazism, as I like to call it. So I think it's not so clear-cut.
Yeah, we can open up the floor then.
Okay. You're probably one of the very few people on the planet who thinks that this is not a full invasion. And I understand that the original propaganda, 5 or 6 days ago, was about a kind of humanitarian intervention to protect the people of Donbass. Additionally, I would never deny that the civil war and the post-Maidan Ukraine hasn't given birth to a kind of humanitarian atrocity, and that there actually is serious suffering in Donbass, and that should be addressed in some way. I would never deny that. However, in geopolitically speaking, this is simply a ruse. And the idea that cities can fall. Kharkiv recently fell. Cities can be sieged and then assaulted and then fall. A massive convoy can pass through a country. The notion that Russia is just simply going to go home or something like that is absolutely absurd. And even the Russian recognition of the Donbass region was itself an act of aggression. I mean, again, I am not denying that there is suffering on behalf of Russian leaning Ukrainians in the Donbass region. I'm not denying that. But you simply can't decide to leave a country because you want to. That just does not happen. When it happens, it's exceedingly rare, like Czechoslovakia. When you try to do it, you usually end up in a situation like we are in today, or in the American Civil War. There is no popular sovereignty where you can just decide to leave a country. It just simply doesn't work like that. And to say that is just exceedingly naive. Secondly, even if we take your rosy-colored depiction of Putin's campaign as he just wants a neutralized Ukraine and that he's going to allow it to be there. Again, that is a way of hegemonically dominating Ukraine. You are not allowing Ukraine to choose its own destiny by basically enforcing Russia's will upon it. Now, again, I have actually granted that Russia has real strategic interest here. You seem to want to repeat just utterly baffling and uncompelling Kremlin propaganda. How this is some kind of effort at denazification. It's just absurd. I think what you're getting at with Russia is this kind of lack of legitimacy that Russia has faced for some time. The Soviet Union was based around a notion of an eventual, maybe not tomorrow, but workers' revolution across the planet. You seem to almost be suggesting something of the kind. Even in the division of Europe after Yalta at the end of the Second World War, Stalin kind of more or less assumed that there was going to be a Bolshevik revolution or communism in Britain, and the West and capitalist powers would turn on each other and fight to the death, and he just kind of roll on in. By the 60s and 70s, that clearly was not happening. The world was bifurcated. And the legitimacy of the Soviet state began to be, well, we fought the Germans, we defeated Nazism, therefore we kind of deserve this. And so this denazification, which is just simply absurd. I mean, the Azov battalion is a part of the military, and they are fighting, but it is a very minor thing. But I don't think that's even what you mean. You seem to kind of be playing a semantic shell game where neoliberal capitalism is Nazism or something. Neoliberal capitalism, true globalism, has been absolutely in effect over the past 30 years. We've lived through the end of history. I think that time is over. We are moving towards a period of civilizational states. There is going to be a notion of Europe with NATO as its fighting force, the EU plus NATO. That's not quite the original idea behind NATO, but that is what it's going to look like. There's going to be greater European integration. And so a kind of, gross realm or something, which is a term that you evoked, that was evoked by Carl Schmitt, who was invoked by National Socialists. A gross realm is exactly what Russia is trying to create here. Russia is shoring up geostrategic interest through creating a zone, a great space that allows it to exist. I understand why they want that. The problem is that is going to be happening in Europe as well. This is where we are headed, is toward civilizational blocks. And, again, if you think the truckers are going to come to your rescue and create revolution in Canada or the United States, I have nothing to say to that other than keep dreaming.
The notion that Russia's siege of of Ukraine's major cities is evidence that they want to annex the whole territory of Ukraine evinces a stunning lack of Russian geopolitical interests in the region. Russia doesn't want to annex Ukraine. It's going to create too many problems. They're going to have an occupying force. They're going to have to face Ukrainian resistance. Putin is well aware of the fact that no government can rule at the expense of the will of a people. It's just simply not realistic. Now, Russia has been very slow in this invasion, and it's actually been very slow in its attempt to capture these cities, precisely because what they're trying to do is give the current Ukrainian government the ability to negotiate a ceasefire and agree to Russia's terms to stop, right? So that's why Russia's been, somewhat slow the past week. It's not if Russia wanted to simply just roll over and take all of Ukraine, they would have done it already. The reason they're not doing that is because they're trying to
invaded them in order to offer them the chance to reach a ceasefire.
Precisely, because precisely. They are trying to force the Ukrainian government to agree to Russia's terms of both neutrality, of disarmament,
yeah, it's called
of ceasing.
Invading a country, man.
Yeah, that's hey, shut the fuck up! Don't interrupt me. That's not the same thing as an annexation. You understand? So there's no dispute about the question of Russia using military force in Ukraine. The point is it's not. They don't have any design. At least there's no evidence of any design on part of the Russian government to annex it. Now, the fact that they're sieging all of the major Ukrainian cities isn't evidence of that. There's no evidence Russia just wants to go in and take over all of Ukraine. Now, if you're going to interpret taking over,
I never mentioned annexation. You did. Now,
okay. So what you mean? So what you mean by taking over? What you mean by taking over is simply this bullshit about hegemonic influence. Well, let me introduce you to the reality of geopolitics. Yes. Geopolitics, but the problem is that you're trying to formalize it. Geopolitics is an informal reality of, yes, historical civilizational realities, geographic realities, the realities of a necessity of a balance of security. None of those things are really formalized, and it's just an unspoken rule of international relations. Of course, we know that not every country is formally, or sorry, not every country is practically equal. Formally, every country has the equal right to self-determination, but there's also underpinning realities behind that formal right to self-determination. That's just an unspoken, I mean, the U.S. is not going to tolerate a nuclear-armed Mexico on its doorstep. The U.S. is not going to tolerate a Canada that is hostile to it. We all know that this is how it works in the world. And it's not necessarily because of imperialism either. It's also because of the arrangement of geopolitics and the necessity for a balance of security. Russia specifically has been encircled by NATO. Russia specifically is encircled by powers that have a historical precedent of unjustifiably invading and encroaching on the sovereignty of others. So Russia's position has been purely defensive. If you actually understand what Russia wants in Ukraine, they don't want to have tyranny over the people of Ukraine or impose values or impose some kind of way of life, nor do they want to exploit the resources of Ukraine. They want Ukraine to basically not be used for purposes of aggression against themselves. It's literally that simple. Now, you said actually a lot of things, so I'm going to quickly... Hold on, I'm going to go one by one, because you actually said a lot of things. You said that a territory cannot simply leave a country. Well, can a people simply overthrow a government, or a segment of the people, I should say, like in the 2014 Maidan revolution? That revolution changed.
It's called a coup.
Sure, but that changes the definition of Ukraine's sovereignty. If they can have a fucking coup, then the people in the Donbass can secede, and it's all bets are off. Every revolution in history has led to rearrangements in a country's borders and changing the status quo as far as territories are concerned, because the actual formal site of sovereignty has collapsed and is changing, right? So that's a complete bullshit point. Now, you talked about this stuff regarding this expectation. Sorry, what's not?
I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's called a coup. It's a violent regime change.
So, okay, did the coup have legal sanction?
But what I'm saying is, you do not have a right peacefully to hold a referendum and say, we just don't want to be in this government anymore. It's going to only
what government? Hold on. What government? Where does that government get its legitimacy from? Violence, right? A violent coup. So by that same device, you're going to see...
For all governments have legitimacy.
Sure. But before then, to maintain stability, you have legal precedent, right, to define laws. When that's all thrown into the fucking air, then yes, people are going to secede, and they're going to, by the same device, actually, that the previous government was overthrown. It's happened in every revolution in history. Ukraine cannot complain that its sovereignty is encroached upon because these people want to declare their independence, when Ukraine illegally deposed, without any legal sanction or precedent whatsoever, its former government. I mean, how is it that Ukraine can even expect or have the entitlement that countries should even recognize its government, right? What government is that? It was overthrown in a coup, right? So that's
the United States was created in a coup. I mean, you seem to be suggesting that there's a real sovereign Ukraine, and then there's 2014, and then there's no more.
No. What I'm suggesting.
The exact same concerns as any other regime.
Sure. Every state is founded by violence, but
is America a legitimate government?
We're not getting into that.
Non-rhetorical question.
Every state
is America a legitimate government? Yes or no?
It's a legitimate state. Yes. So every state is founded by violence. We know that. Okay. Every state is founded by violence, but if you want to maintain long-term stability and long-term sovereignty of the specific definition of that sovereignty, right, which is your territory and your borders, then a sudden and violent revolution is going to throw all of that into question, and everything becomes up for grabs, right? It's all fair game. You can't lay claim to the same level of sovereignty the government you just overthrew did, right? Because you have called
yes,
into
you can.
you have called you
The
sure you
United States overthrew the British Empire and lay claim to the entire continent. So yes, you can. Well, all you're claiming.
Hold on, they didn't. Hold on.
Blank.
Last time I checked, we don't have the whole fucking continent. Okay, what you're saying isn't what I'm trying to say specifically is that you cannot have the expectation, right? You can't have the sense of entitlement that people should respect the previous status quo. I'm not saying you can't try and maintain that previous status quo. I'm saying you can't make pretense to some kind of international law about your sovereign territory when the legitimacy of your government has yet to prove itself in any kind of way.
Ukraine was recognized by every country around the world. What are you
Ukraine's government was violently deposed.
Yes, and it was recognized by every country in the world. So therefore, it is recognized.
The violent deposition was recognized.
You in your chat room might not like it, but the rest of the world.
Russia recognized the new government under new terms and conditions of taking Crimea, right? So no, it wasn't the same thing. It was absolutely not the same thing. Russia took Crimea. They took Crimea precisely because of this pretext.
We're just talking. I mean, was Russia's annexation of Crimea legitimate?
Of course.
I mean, it's like we're just.
Of course.
Why is that legitimate and a 2014 coup isn't?
We're not talking about that. We're saying if they're going to have
one and you dislike the other, so you're claiming one.
It's not about liking or disliking anything. It's about Ukraine cannot appeal to international law and appeal to its own sovereignty about, Crimea is actually ours. Russia committed an act of aggression. The separatists shouldn't be allowed to secede. They're committing an act of aggression. Well, everything's fair game. It's that simple.
It clearly has. The entire Western world is backing Ukraine. So you
fuck the Western world. Why do I give a fuck about the whole Western world? Fuck the Western world. The Western world is a fraction of the global. Who cares about the Western world? Hold on. Can you tell me why anyone should
about the Western world?
Who cares? Who should give a fuck? Who cares what they recognize?
You all are just
who cares what they recognize? There's more people in China. There's more people in China than the whole fucking Western world combined. Why is the Western world's opinion the only one that matters?
So you have the most people, and that gives you more legitimacy. That's what you're arguing.
So
I don't know because the Western world has set the tone.
Well, I would say that their inherent superiority would be maybe, but that was disproven in World War II when the fascists got their ass handed to them by the Soviets. So we can't say it's because they're more superior as a race or anything. So yeah, it's going to have to be one man, every man counts. So I think, population does matter.
So because the Soviet Union killed a lot of people, what it thinks is correct, that is what you literally...
I'm trying to say we have to probably begin from a premise that one person isn't superior to any other kind of person in this globe. You can't say that Europeans they matter more than China or they matter more than India. Why? Because based on what? Why? Why should they matter more?
They have historically mattered more in the sense that they created these institutions that we're even talking about. Now, they might not matter more in the future.
And those institutions are being overthrown. Those institutions are being overthrown as we speak. That's multipolarity.
The UN's being overthrown as we speak?
Really? The UN was not created by the founding members of the UN. You had the Soviet Union, you had China. It wasn't just Europeans who created the UN.
It was created in San Francisco. I think it was kind of sort of a Western institution. Secondly,
the Soviet Union was a founding member of the United Nations.
Overthrown is strengthened beyond any measure over the past week. It's unbelievable. The EU is strengthened. People want to join the EU. People are desperate. First of all, even like Estonia are desperately trying to join NATO.
Listen.
These institutions are strengthened. You're not looking at reality. You're just simply talking.
Right now, they've been whipped up into an anti-Russian frenzy. It doesn't it doesn't address the underlying contradictions within Europe. The problem of populism.
What are the contradictions within Europe?
They call it populism.
what are you talking about? Like right-wing parties that hold 10%?
Just general alternative anti-establishment forces, people who are dissatisfied with the Davos agenda, with the European Union, and with the Anglo-Saxon ruling class that actually rules over them. You mentioned in one of your points that there's this new European identity that's being created. No, there fucking isn't. If there was a sovereign Franco-Germanic bloc that is its own pole, then why would they have not acted in their own actual economic interests and agreed to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline deal? They would have said, fuck you to the Americans and simply done that. Now they're being the dogs of the Americans. There's no independent European identity. These are American puppets. You know it and I know it. They're acting on behalf of America's interests, not their own.
Less American puppets than they were in 1945. In 1945, I would not disagree with you that they're effectively American puppets.
There has never been a point. There has never been a point.
They have an interest which might not be yours, but that's the whole point.
What is their interest?
Like a sovereign.
What is their sovereign interest in getting rid of? Okay, what's Germany and France's sovereign interest in fucking over its own source, getting its own source of energy and getting cheaper gas? Why would they fuck that over if they're acting on behalf of their own sovereignty?
It's moving in a different way.
Oh, do you mean to tell me? Do you mean to tell me they're asserting their sovereignty by now turning to green energy and windmills and renewables or some shit? Like, get real.
I hope they go back to nuclear power, which they were advanced in.
Okay, but that's not 40% of their energy is thanks to Russia.
I'm not a big fan of green energy.
Sure,
but 50% of their natural gas from Russia.
Yeah, 40%. 40%.
They made a strong decision.
Okay, that decision comes at the expense of their own sovereign interests.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
They made a sovereign decision to end it. You're just using words again. You throw out words.
Because they're in NATO. Because they're in NATO.
They didn't make a sovereign decision.
Everyone makes a formally sovereign decision, but they did it on behalf of America's interests, not their own. They're selling out their own interests.
Maybe that's true, but maybe that's true, or maybe that's true to a degree. But you're simply saying that. All I am saying is that there is a bifurcated world that resembles the bifurcated world.
How is it bifurcated? Between who? Who are the two parties to this bifurcation?
There is a renewed West, and with a NATO a fighting force. The way I see it is Russia is going to turn to a kind of Eurasianism where all of that this is again speculation, but that natural gas and resources and oil and other resources, hydrocarbons, are going to be headed east.
Okay.
So you're going to find yourself as the little brother of China.
Okay.
And so I don't wish that upon the Russian people, to be honest. I actually am. Despite what you might think of me, I actually am. I have a lot of affection for Russia and Russia culture. I want a unified northern hemisphere.
That's not material.
At the end of the day. I'm not going to get that because people like
it's not material to what we're
trapped past.
Okay, that's not material to what we're talking about. So you mentioned a word, Eurasianism. Do you think that there's maybe a member of NATO that exists right now that is part of the Eurasian sphere?
A member of NATO that exists right now that's part of the Eurasian sphere. I don't know what you're suggesting. What do you
is NATO the West? Is
like
there a country? Is there a country you're forgetting about? Is NATO the West or?
Are you talking? More or less.
Why would you say Hungary? Why would you say Hungary before Turkey? You remember Turkey's in NATO. You remember that, right?
Oh, Turkey's in NATO. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So Turkey's in NATO, and Turkey has interests that neither align with the West fully, nor do they align with Russia or China fully. Iran has interests that don't align with the West and don't necessarily align with Russia and China all the time. That's why it's not a new bifurcated world. It's a multipolar world. Often there's interests that France and Germany have that don't align with America. So this idea of this...
Yeah, but the fundamental seismic
the West is a myth.
Is going to be bifurcated.
The West is a myth.
I actually agree. I granted you actually a good point about Turkey.
Because
there's a Turkish question that we're going to
have to address. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. When you say the West, you're not actually talking about Europe as a whole. You're just talking about the rule of the former British Empire, which is based on the Anglo-Saxon elites of the United States and the CIA, the State Department, the Davos agenda, the global institutions, all that kind of stuff. The global financial institutions, which is the most important part of that. All of that has its center. It's not simply the West; it's the Anglosphere. Okay, so. The only thing that unites the West as a whole is the leash the American empire has on its Western allies through NATO. When this leash is gone, there's a new Western question about, okay, well, what does the West really mean? Who is the hegemon of Europe? Is it going to be Franco-Germania? Is it going to be
1945? I don't agree with you in 2022.
So, see, the problem with you...
France is a nuclear... Let me finish real quick. France is a nuclear power. France has an egomaniac Napoleon complex individual in charge of its country at the moment that wants to have its day in the sun. Germany is now radically rearmed. I think the military budget is 3 to 5% of GDP. We have not seen this since the Second World War. This is actually going to be different. And Europe was in rubble, particularly Germany. Germany was divided in 1945. There is going to be a very quality to this neo-Cold War that I'm describing. China is also going to be a new element that wasn't there, at least at the end of this.
You are witnessing the...
So it's going to be different.
Yeah, so
what I'm saying is that it's going to be bifurcated geostrategic environment.
It's not, because what you're actually witnessing right now is the implosion of the American empire. And all the barking that the European countries and leaders are doing and their media is making is because of the seething and writhing of the death of the empire that they used to be a part of. You see this, some kind of new rebirth of the American empire or the so-called West. What you're actually witnessing is its demise in real time. You're witnessing a unity. You're witnessing
to suggest that,
because the only kind of unity you're witnessing is the unity of copium. They're using the same copium raw material to cope with a common empire that's dying that they used to have. So as far as what's going to replace this is concerned, it's not clear whatsoever. It's not clear what future.
Do you think Russia is rising?
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, look, I think there are very strong...
Do you know what... Okay, does Russia have a trade... Does Russia have a trade surplus or a trade deficit like the U.S. does?
It has a trade surplus.
Of course. So it is rising.
Well, if you look at Russian society, I mean, this is a oligarchic petrostate. I mean, I don't... This is not going...
What do you mean by oligarchic? Oligarchic is a political term. Who does Putin share power with?
Oh, you think Putin doesn't share power with these oligarchs who are
absolutely
sitting
not
in a palatial room with him?
Absolutely not. They have no sovereignty whatsoever.
Okay, so it's just a one-man government?
No, it's a popular front government with other parties in it. But yeah, it's a popular government.
Okay, well, I mean...
Where do you think Putin gets his support from? You think Putin gets his support from the oligarchs or from the pensioners nostalgic about the Soviet Union and the countryside?
Why does he have them there? I think Putin does have a lot of popularity.
Putin doesn't have oligarchs.
Why is he sitting in a room with billionaires?
Because they own some of the biggest industries in Russia. The biggest companies.
I don't think that gives you power.
Is the U.S.
I agree that Putin's the man. I think this.
So is China in the U.S. an oligarchy too? Then
it is an oligarchy. I think it functions in a bit of a different way. I mean, it's not such an intense wealth inequality, to be honest, in the United States as it is in Russia. But yeah, there's an oligarchic quality to the United States, no doubt.
Okay, oligarchy is a political term. Okay, the power that Russian...
Yeah, I mean, okay, that's fine. I mean, oligarchy is a Greek term literally ruled by a few, but...
Which is political.
I think I'm using it in a more kind of modern way of like calling Jeff Bezos
you're just referring to the fact
that literally
you're referring to the fact that
he has immense power. He owns the Washington Post.
Russia has billionaires. Russia has billionaires, and it also has a lot of wealth inequality. That's what you're referring to.
Yes, it has more intense wealth inequality than the United States.
So I think China does as well. What's your point?
Well, I guess your point. What is so hot about Russia? I mean, like, this is a rising new society for socialism.
Because Russia's
or it's a rising new society
because
for
Russia's.
What are you claiming about it?
There's two facets to it. So if you want to talk about, I don't see how does having wealth inequality correlate to not being a rising power? It doesn't make any sense.
I don't think the Russian way of life is going to be particularly attractive to most of the world. Unlike
Wait.
in the Cold War,
Wait. Why does the Russian
an intense fascination for intellectuals?
But-
I don't think anyone.
But Russia's not returning to the Soviet Union, where it was going to export its ideology to the people of the world. Russia way of life is for Russians. Who else?
Okay, well, fine, but it's
That doesn't mean
more
it's not rising.
powerful.
Doesn't mean it's not rising. That's the meaning of multipolarity. China is rising. Russia's rising. Iran, in a way, is rising. Turkey's rising. There's these different poles around the world with their own way of life, and they're rising. Now, does that mean they're going to export their way of life to other countries? No. Doesn't mean they're not rising, though.
I of course agree that like the power distribution is going to change over time. And I have said in my opening statement that the kind of true globalism of unipolarity is ending. What I am arguing is maybe not dissimilar from what you just said, which is that we're moving towards a world of civilizational states. Now, I think the big bifurcation, and there are, of course, are different powers. In the post-war era, we had, a neutral Yugoslavia. We had the South America. What were they? Middle East is a rising power with resource wealth. I mean, there's always been a degree of multipolarity, rather. What I am arguing is that we're moving largely towards civilizational states. We are going to see intense unification on the Western and Central Europe, on the European continent.
The equivalent to a European polarity is Franco-Germania. It's France and Germany. Okay, the unity of France and Germany. Right. The problem is that the Americans have done everything they could to undermine that specific bloc as an independent polarity. And America blocking Nord Stream 2 and this whole shit that's going on in Ukraine, which is actually all because of that, by the way, that was specifically about undermining any independent European polarity. And now the Germans and the French and the other Europeans have been whipped into a frenzy. They're getting back in line as the lackeys of NATO and American imperialism. I mean, NATO as an institution is just American unipolarity. It doesn't have any room for an independent European polarity.
It was not created as American unipolarity. It was created as an anti-Russian military alliance in 1940.
NATO was not created as an extension of American unipolarity to enforce
unipolarity comes after the end of the Soviet Union. There's obviously a bipolar.
Unipolarity American unipolar system has its origins in the post-war Bretton Woods system. Now, there was a communist bloc and there was a Soviet bloc, but as far as the roots of the American system are concerned, that's NATO, that's Bretton Woods. It's the IMF and so on and so on.
I disagree with that.
Okay,
but that's not unipolarity has a specific definition. It was coined by Charles Krauthammer after the fall of the Soviet Union, and it's more or less the same thing as Fukuyama's end of history. It is basically there is no other system.
I know what polarity is because
when I say the word unipolarity, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay, so
was NATO a kind of extension of America in the 1940s? Absolutely.
Okay,
but
that's all I wanted to. Okay,
things change.
Okay,
and
so how can that change?
Different position than it was in 1945. Germany is rearming to the teeth.
You're right, but
that's remarkable.
Yeah, you're right, but guess what? Turkey's in NATO. NATO as an institution has no further reason for this is its last breath that it's taking against Russia's actions in Ukraine. Europe is internally divided between West and East because the Intermarium, the forces that want to recreate the Intermarium, Poland and Hungary and the Three Seas Alliance, they're positioned against the Franco-Germanic bloc. So within Europe, you have these very strong divisions.
They are positioned strongly against Russia right now. What I am saying is that this invasion has revived something that I agree was almost had an identity crisis. That is NATO. How do we use this thing? Is it a force for humanitarian interventions? Should Russia be a part of NATO? That was actually floated at the end of the Cold War. Is it still against Russia? What do we do with this thing? Now it's actually due to this
It's
invasion
the
the
putrescence.
massive reaction against it in the West. It has been revived.
That's precisely what it is.
It's remarkable.
It's
you have to look at reality and not just say stuff like an intermarium, which is some like thing bloggers talk about.
The intermarium is something bloggers have been talking about when it's been Poland's before.
I've heard intermarium from various like petty nationalists for years. The seismic bifurcation of Europe is going to be where it was more or less.
What you are witnessing now in Europe's newfound sense of unity rallying around Ukraine is nothing more than the putrescence of the American empire with its last dying breath.
Okay, well, you would say that when they weren't. You said that you would say that a month ago.
Yes.
When NATO was having an identity crisis. Now things have changed. Data has changed. The situation has changed. Emotions have changed, and you're saying the same thing.
The emotions you're witnessing. Hold on.
Kind of propaganda.
These strong emotions that you're witnessing is a psychosis on a mass scale to cope with the end of this empire.
Well, okay, but
it's a mass psychosis.
I agree with you, which I don't. That in itself is like you're admitting to the fact that NATO has a raison d'etre, even if it's a psychosis, and there is much more unification. There are countries like Sweden, Sweden and Estonia Finland that now want to join up, and they wouldn't have.
Yeah, there's a new impetus for American, and that's what it is, American aggression against Russia. But that doesn't actually say anything about like an authentic polarity, authentic civilizational renewal. It has nothing to do with that.
Okay. Well, that's your opinion. I mean, you're just saying that though, and you're not like
because
arguing
because an authentic, let's say, polarity or civilizational renewal
authentic? What is
civilizational block where they revive would not principally be based upon weaponizing the old, the last leg of the old arrangement, which was positioned against Russia. It wouldn't be simply based off of huffing this copium about how, Russia's the bad guy now, we all need to unite against Russia. Well, the material basis for the anti-Russian sentiment is a prior state of affairs, which was the 20th century, the post-war period, the Soviet Union, and so on and so on. So the unwillingness to let that go, right, attests to the fact that they're not allowing themselves to have the breathing room to discover their own identity and so on and so on. They're still clinging to an arrangement that's led by the U.S.
Mere assertion with not an argument. And the idea that history doesn't matter is absurd. Obviously, Vladimir Putin, in his explicit statements, has said that Ukraine, they are our brothers. Maybe they're our prodigal sons. We have ties between us. That this is the foundation of the Russian Empire, Kiev and Moscow. So you're just claiming history. They're holding on to the past and they're not doing what I want.
You didn't listen to it. No. You didn't listen. You didn't listen to what I said. You didn't listen to what I said. Okay, so we can agree that Europe as an independent polarity didn't exist after World War II, right? It's just led by the Americans, right? That has been the status quo. That has been the status quo up until recently, where the material foundations for an independent European polarity, specifically because of the revival of German industry and the revival of the French market and so on, has created the foundation for an independent polarity in Europe, right?
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
You are claiming that because they are getting natural resources from Germany was getting natural resources from Russia, that was a kind of foundation for greater German independence. Is that what you're arguing?
Precisely.
Okay, I get that. And I understand that. And in fact, in my heart of hearts, I don't want a division between East and West. I want greater unity across
this unity, okay, but the unity that you're witnessing,
that's not going to happen.
Here's my point though. The unity that you're witnessing,
Cold War.
The unity, let me just be very clear about this. The unity that you are witnessing is not based in people awakening to this newfound independent polarity. It's a unity that is based on asserting the identity of an arrangement that no longer has a real, authentic, material or civilizational foundation, which is American control of Europe.
Because they want it. Like, you don't like it, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I don't know.
Specify.
I hope
Why is it independent?
Okay. Merkel was opposed to nuclear power. I hope Germans wake up and get nuclear power, because that is a much better way forward.
Okay, you know what? Let's cut the bullshit.
It's happening.
Sure,
and
okay,
let's just America. It is what it is.
Let's cut the bullshit. Let's cut the bullshit then. And I'll ask you very frankly, what could possibly be in Europe's own sovereign interest as a polarity to renew its hostilities with Russia over this specific question of Ukraine? Why is it in Europe's interest? Go ahead.
They don't want to be invaded. They might very well be wrong about that. I personally do not think that Putin's ambitions extend beyond Ukraine. This evokes memory.
Hold on. So what you're saying?
They have made a decision.
Wait. Okay. So you're trying to sell me.
Aggressive Russia, even if it doesn't roll into Germany, that is scary to them.
So okay, I see.
Rearm against it.
I see.
They have a lot of
what you're trying to sell me. Yeah.
Leads them to that conclusion.
So what you're trying to sell to me right now is that very genuinely, Europe's reaction to what Russia's doing in Ukraine is because they fear they're going to be invaded by Putin and by Russia.
I wonder why Germans might fear an invasion by Russians. I wonder where they got that crazy notion.
It's okay. Let me ask you a question. Hold on. Let me ask you a question.
This is how absurd you are. People don't agree with you, and then you say they didn't make a sovereign decision.
All right,
when they don't agree with you.
It's like those two.
It is so the level.
Spencer, you're getting your panties in a bunch about this whole agreement thing. We got it loud and clear. Your argument is that I'm saying it because they don't agree with me. You don't have to keep repeating that. It's just a pointless thing to raise.
Stop saying it then, because it's obviously
no, because I'm not. Because my reasoning is not based on.
No one agrees with you, Haz. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, and you should probably embrace your identity as a marginal figure who promotes Marxist-Leninism, as opposed to claiming that anyone who disagrees with you isn't sovereign.
Richard, I did not expect to come have a debate with you for Richard fucking Spencer to tell me that I'm the one who should awaken to the fact that I'm a marginal figure, okay? So let's simmer down and sit down for a little bit, okay? Now,
I was the leader of the new Europe, according to you. I am simply looking at reality. I am not claiming that Germany isn't sovereign.
We need to get back.
Germany disagrees with me my entire lifetime. You're flip-flopping. I don't claim they're not sovereign.
You're flip-flopping around.
Because I'm not absurd.
So you're saying that Europe's reaction right now is because they fear Russia's going to invade Europe, and that they have historical precedent for this because the Soviet Union took Berlin after Operation like, what are you fucking trying to say? What is your point?
Yes, there is real historical reasons why France and Germany, as the two most important countries in the EU, would fear invasion by foreign powers.
What do you mean? Russia's when Russia took Berlin, that was after do you know what happened, right? Are you trying to say the Soviet Union just randomly decided to push eastward and take Berlin? I mean,
no, the Soviet Union reached a pact with Germany. Germany invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, and then Stalin not only pushed the German army out of his sphere, his Grossraum, if you will, but in fact moved forward. And in 1945, clearly anticipated that Europe would soon become communist.
Hold on, we're gonna put that on. We don't have time to debate about that, but that means that the Soviet Union was in a defensive position to ensure they're not going to be invaded again, because lo and behold, they get randomly fucking invaded by Western aggressors. Now, based on that history specifically that you brought up,
Joseph Stalin was a shrinking violet who just wanted to play defense. I mean, this is just
Stalin. The truth is, there's no precedent for adventurism on part of Stalin. He was against adventurism and this Trotskyist delusion of exporting the revolution. Second of all,
I agree with that more or less. So the notion that he didn't roll across Europe Wow.
He rolled across Europe. He rolled across.
Literally, no one will agree with that.
He rolled across Europe he rolled across Europe to ensure the Soviet Union does not get invaded again. Now, based on that history,
I think that was one of the motivations. But it was also about world communism, comrade.
Then why didn't they take the West? They could have easily taken the West. Why didn't they?
They didn't exactly take the West because the British Empire that was flailing still had some pop. The United States entered late; it still had some power.
The Soviets got there before anyone. They got there before anyone. They could have taken whatever they wanted.
They could have. They made a strategic decision not to. But Stalin clearly assumed that capitalist powers would turn on one another, and that you would soon have at least a European.
Stalin believed, as far as you're getting into the ideological bullshit. Let's just get back to the meat and potatoes.
Well, there's like diaries and interviews that indicate such things. I'm not getting into ideological bullshit.
You are. So let's get back to the meat and potatoes.
Why occupy Germany up until 1989, 91? If you're just
it was no more an occupation of Germany than America occupied Germany in the West. So it was formally not an occupation. It's just that Germany fell under the hegemony.
I agree, but people liked Western Germany a lot more. Let's just put it that way.
That's not necessarily true, actually. It's not necessarily true whatsoever.
Did anyone sneak into East Germany?
There was a brain drain from the east to the west. That doesn't mean everyone liked West Germany more than the east, though. It's not true.
That's fair enough, but and I agree with you that there's a kind of decadent temptation to a lot of the Americanized West. But at the end of the day, where would you want to raise a family?
The East.
In Bavaria,
are you kidding?
Or
the East?
Prussia?
Where would you want to raise a family? I mean, if you're a bachelor who's having fun, probably you want to live in the West. But for raising a family, of course you wouldn't want to be in the more.
Which realm had higher birth rates?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
Was it the West? I'm assuring your point is that it's the West.
And the East has serious problems now.
Hold on.
Even East Germany kind of resembles Eastern Europe. I mean, even today, to some degree, it has serious problems that are kind of fairly tragic, to be honest, and could be solved. But you clearly have Soviet nostalgia, which is fine, but
it was much better to raise a family in the East. Much better. It's much better to raise a family
being a Ukrainian farmer. During Stalinism, maybe that's not the case.
You want to bring up the famine of 33 and 34 and debate about that, because you can't actually talk about why the fuck Europe would be against Russia right now, if not because of a mass psychosis, and it has nothing to do with Europe's own interests.
A mass psychosis.
And you've pivoted so much. You said it's because they fear being invaded by Russia. What? There's no precedent for Russia invading Europe. There's precedent for the West invading Russia, though, plenty of times.
Well, yeah, but there's Napoleon, Hitler, etc. But there's the perspective of a European at the end of the Second World War was you have these Soviet tanks rolling in, taking over our countries.
Well, that's what happens. That's what happens when you invade a country. The country's gonna push back and neutralize you. No, but they do deserve. The threat does deserve. The military does deserve to be disarmed, and the threat should be neutralized. The criminals who attacked you should be brought to justice, and the government that attacked you should be overthrown. Yeah, that's how it works. That's the way of war. It was a total war, a complete total war of annihilation, and the Soviets were very. They showed a lot of mercy to Germany.
I basically agree, but what is please refrain from the moralization. The idea that Germans
have no reason to expect. Why should
understandable, because it's hell on earth.
There's what's hell on earth?
I think the Soviet Union, perhaps later on, I think it was actually pretty reasonable. And there's even, when I was living in Berlin for a little while, and even in Bavaria, there's a kind of nostalgia, a kind of hipster, fantasy of the Soviet days. But like, let's just be brutally honest here. Communism sucked.
I disagree.
It's just awful.
Even if I were to agree with you, which is completely irrelevant, it's not true, but it's completely irrelevant. What does that have to do with the newfound European unity against Russia not being based on any rational interests of Europeans themselves?
It's a vivid historical memory, is what it is.
Of communism, Russia doesn't live under the same system that it used to.
I know, but they're easily aligned. And
hold on, and you know why you're especially wrong? Yeah,
Russia
do you know why you're especially wrong?
Post-communist.
You know why you're especially wrong about this? Because all of this anti-Russian sentiment, if it was just based in being traumatized by communism, you wouldn't see such high rates of nostalgia on part of the older generations in Eastern Europe for it has nothing to do. Even Polish nationalists have inherited the legacy of the Polish communist system. What you have are competing forms of nationalism in Eastern Europe that have specifically defined themselves against Russia. That's not because communism was so bad. It's because they needed to fill the vacuum left behind by the communist ideology after the fall of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet bloc. So it's not because...
Fair enough. I might actually agree with a lot of what you just said.
Okay. So there is no rational reason for Europeans to fear a Russian invasion or to oppose Russia's actions in Ukraine. It seems like
good that politics has nothing to do with rationality.
Well, okay. Can you admit to me that it's based on moralism?
No, I'm not going to admit that.
Okay, so what expression have any Germans or French formulated in a significant capacity? The Ukrainian flag is the new George Floyd. It's the new wear your mask. It's the new get vaccinated. That's what it is. It's not based in any kind of like raw self-interest on part of Germans or French or Europeans.
I agree that is the case on social media, and there's a lot of
it's the case in general
that resembles BLM. I agree with that.
Yeah,
but
so it's
look real.
Okay, if you want to look,
social media distraction.
You want to look at
has changed over the past week.
Any which way you look at it, culturally and sociologically, this is an astroturfed, moralistic campaign that people use to identify themselves and virtue signal their compliance with the status quo and the institutions that grew us. On Reddit, on Twitch, on YouTube, wherever you go, on Twitter, people are doing this.
I don't disagree that there's an element of that. However, to claim that anything is fully astroturfed is just wrong. You cannot just invent things whole cloth.
Which you don't.
Half of the world to put a Ukrainian flag on their Facebook.
Because
there is something real in this. And in terms of like, we're just reestablishing the world order. What I am arguing is that the world has changed in the past week.
I
changed indelibly.
I fundamentally disagree. I fundamentally disagree.
We're in a new paradigm right now.
I fundamentally disagree that this is based in something real. No one actually gives a shit about Ukraine.
Well, it's just
it's a way of expressing one's virtue signaling toward the agenda of the prevailing institutions, which is being rewarded through social feedback loops
to a certain extent.
Yeah, it has nothing. It has nobody independently looks at this situation and just independently comes to some kind of solid position on it. Well, they're going with the flow.
No one have agency, according to you? Everyone's just a robot or an NPC.
I think Redditors are NPCs.
I will grant you,
I do,
to a certain extent, what you said, that putting a Ukrainian flag is a kind of virtue signal. I will agree with that. But like, to claim that no one has agency or that there aren't real historical and geopolitical factors at play here is just ridiculous.
I think there is a reality of this type of, which is led, who has its center, by the way, in the Anglo-Saxon elites, which is this kind of condescending sense of superiority over Russians, a kind of civilizational racism Europeans have over against Russians and against Chinese and so on and so on. But the core of this identity that makes it possible isn't based in anything real within their own lives. It's based in institutions that distinguish them and which interpolate them as subjects. And to use less.
Sounds like you're describing systemic racism or something.
No.
Look, there is a European identity.
No.
There are smaller forms of European identity as well.
But the problem is hold on. There is a Russian identity. Russian identity is based in Russianness. We are Russians. It's our history. It's who we are. Same with Chinese, same with anywhere else in the world. But this so-called European identity that you're talking about is not based in any type of particular European civilization.
All you're doing is dehumanizing my people.
Shit,
you don't have an authentic identity, but you do.
No. Maybe there is an authentic European identity, but I'm trying to say the one that is being displayed now in this Pledge of Allegiance to the Ukrainian astroturfing campaign is not based on that. It's based in a type of fake universalism, a false universalism, and a type of proving of one's reflexivity, which is what all of these astroturfed campaigns are about. You say Black Lives Matter, you say take the vaccine, wear the mask, because you're expressing that you're conscientious or you're civilized or you're somehow in the know and you're a universal subject, right? The problem is that Europeans are not universal subjects, they're Europeans. So if they started acting like Europeans and not pretending that there's the universal subject of American globalism, they wouldn't be against Russia and condemning Russia right now. They would just be looking after their own interests, the interests of Germany, the interests of France, the interests of Ireland, whatever you want. They wouldn't be acting on behalf of some kind of global, universal interest.
If you can create greater division in Europe, that is better for Russia. Russia, I'm sure, was enthused by things like Brexit. Russia is enthused by petty nationalist disputes. The fact is, part of European identity, I agree, is a kind of expansive, universal, if you want to say, Aryanism.
No, it's not. But it's not. Hold on. Spencer, the reason you're a tragical figure.
History doesn't exist.
Spencer, the reason you're a tragical figure is because you're an embarrassment. You're kind of right. It is based on a type of racist, neo-Nazism, whatever. But for the leaders of the Western world to come out and admit this means the end of the Western world basis of soft power in the entire globe. So you're an embarrassment for them. You air the dirty laundry, the dirty truth they will never admit. And it's a precondition for Europe to not admit this in order to maintain its so-called unified identity. So the problem what you're trying to say is that, we have this kind of universal Aryanism. Again, what they're pretending to be is universal subjects in the abstract. They're not Aryans, they're not Europeans, they're not whatever, they're not any type of particular person. This is just all universal humanity. They say the international community, when in reality it's just Europe, America, and Australia. They don't
all of that is the last 30 years. I think things are dramatically
when I talk about civilizational racism, I'm not talking about systemic racism. I'm talking about how the fact, for example, one does not become human, a universal human subject, according to these liberal Nazis, unless one is a Redditor, right? If you live in China or you live in Russia or whatever, you are backward, Asiatic, and so on. You don't have enough reflexivity. You're not conscientious enough. But when you're on Reddit and you're a Redditor who's, you like Pokemon and you like all that dumb bullshit that they like, right? You play video games, all of a sudden you become humanized. Because why? You're being interpolated by institutions and you're in the know in the way that they are, right? So this is what I mean by the civilization. I'm not talking about some woke bullshit. I'm talking about a specific type of historical false universalism that Europe has projected.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think you're making some interesting points about that quest to kind of be in the know and to be a kind of cosmopolitan digital citizen or something. I think what you're describing is a very real phenomenon. What I am saying, in contradistinction to that, is that as we kind of re-enter a new 20th century, the threat of a world war, the threat of nuclear conflict is in the air. That this is going to bring us back to a harder, grounded, more militarized identity. and literally speaking, in the sense that France and Germany are rapidly.
This identity has no substance. There's no substance to this identity.
Well, says you. I mean, I don't know.
What? Okay, what? Tell me what it's. Tell me what. Okay, tell me what it's.
Just an assertion.
Then I'll ask you. Says me. Okay, I'll ask you. What is the substance of this new globalistic Reddit identity?
Well, I'm saying that I agree with that I might not call it a Reddit identity, but I understand what you're describing, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that.
But so what's its substance?
What I'm saying is that something else is emerging. We were entering that downward spiral, the nihilism, the last man.
So what is the something else?
Described it.
What
of the end of history of American.
What is this? What is the something else that's emerging that's not Reddit liberal globalism?
I mean, Redditors don't like rearm Germany. I mean,
so you're talking about. So you're talking about
martial quality is going to be a key.
So you don't think
I have my own personal desires.
What you're talking about is simply you're talking about Reddit with weapons, nuclear armed Reddit.
I'm not.
Yeah,
I
that's
get
what you're talking about.
I get what you're saying. I get it, and I'm granting you that. Because you're describing a real phenomenon, which is good. All I'm saying is that there actually is something else, and that the current world order is more.
What is this something else? What is its? What
I'm
is?
Arguing.
What is its wealth? What is its soul? What is its substance? What is it except this cosmopolitan digital identity or whatever? What is it?
I think it's there is a.
What's its logos? I should say. What is its logos? It's a better word to say. What is its like? What's its logos?
I understand. There is a kind of Heimat quest. There's a sense of homeness and belonging that I think is desired by every human being, and that exists certainly within Western. And
if you want to have homeless, and
there is a broader.
If you want to have,
there's a. Hold on, I'm answering.
Go finish. There
is a broader quest towards truth, towards expansion, towards new vistas. That is also really
this sounds this is it's all salad, no meat and potatoes. Vistas and what is this?
That's a fair criticism, actually, Haz. I mean, but you're asking me to describe like European consciousness, and so I'm going to have to use.
I'm asking you what the real like. Give me an example.
What is Russianness?
Give me. I can tell you Russianness. Give me an example. For example, give me an example.
The Roman Empire is your example of the combination of Apollonian and martial qualities within Western and Central European.
If I accepted this, fine. Even if I accept this, okay. If I just
even Greco-Roman religious.
Sure, very wishy-washy.
That is an example.
Very wishy-washy. Even if I accept,
I just give you a literal example.
You talk about Rome, and I'm talking about right now. We don't have Rome; we have Reddit right now.
What is Russianness? What's Russianness?
Sure, Russianness is where can we even begin? Russianness is based on a civilization. Sorry.
It's hard. Do you see how it's hard?
No, it's not. It's not hard. Like, it's actually not. It's not particularly hard. Russia's based on a type of determinate universalism, a kind of a society that's main theme is based on end times and apocalypse and sort of forestalling the end times and so on. But specifically, if you want to get to the meat and potatoes of Rama, from what I'm asking, the equivalent from what I'm asking to you is Russia has.
That was somewhat airy-fairy language, and I don't find apocalypse.
No. I just didn't know. I didn't know what you were asking for. If you're asking for the.
Fine.
If you're no, I can answer. The
use of airy-fairy
words. Hold on.
It's hard to describe.
I thought you were asking for an airy-fairy equivalent to what you said. But if you want to know,
okay. Well, I appreciate what you said, but all I'm saying is it's you have to write a book on this.
No, I don't. I can give you a simplification. Russians' new kind of consciousness or new kind of substance or logos is specifically based in the Russian sovereignty, which is because of the nationalization of the oil sector, which has created new Russian platforms, new Russian social media, and new type of Russian identity, which on the one hand has the kind of qualities of a universal citizen, but on the other hand has an acute sense of determinate and situatedness within the specific Russian identity. So they don't moralize against others and impose their way on others. But on the other hand, they have the same level of kind of, I guess, dynamism that the Redditors have, right? So same technological savviness and sophistication, but sense of fundamental groundedness in the particular Russian civilization. I'm not specifically asking you what defines Europe.
I get that. I think that's a good description.
Yeah. So my question for you is that when it comes to this new European identity that you're saying is being defined by anti-Russian sentiment and pro-Ukraine sentiment, what is that based on? What is that based on?
I have answered. I have given you a artsy-fartsy version
of that, but
and I am saying
what is it based on?
The notion of a state that contains the state is Rome. That is the ultimate political structure.
Right. That's your interpretation. But I'm asking you, where can we locate any type of consciousness of this fact in the European society? We see the manifestation. We see is Reddit. You have to admit that it's Reddit. Globalist liberalism.
I'm not going to admit that that's the end-all be-all of European.
Sure, you can try to cope and say that the Reddit globalist liberalism is actually this resurrection of Roman martial spirit or something.
I'm not saying that. I'm not.
So where is the Roman martial spirit? Where is it then? Because what we have now is Reddit.
It's emerging, and it is being kind of catalyzed or sparked by some of the things that we're seeing.
Where is it emerging?
It is emerging. There is a European Union, by the way, which it can only be. I mean, I agree. It's it starts and fits and starts, or it's emerging and fits and starts, but it has to be based on some sense of commonality between Western and Central.
So I'll tell you the commonality.
Whether you want to locate that in Latin language.
The commonality of the so-called
there's a Germanic and Romantic.
We're not seeing that. I'm not against that, but we're not seeing that. I'm not against Latin, Franco,
what
Frankish.
What do you want to see? See, you just want to see something that you want to see, as opposed to opening your eyes and seeing what is actually happening.
I'll tell you what we actually have. So-called European values are not European in particular. They are universal. They're pretended universal values of human rights and liberty. They're all negative abstraction. What is liberty? What is freedom? What does this even fucking mean? It doesn't mean anything determinate or particular. It's based on empty liberal abstraction. So where do we find particular Europe?
Preach.
Okay, but
I agree with everything you just said.
But the pro-Ukraine sentiment and the anti-Russian sentiment is not based on any type of European particularity. It's based on this American globalism.
I agree. I will grant you that, and I've already granted you this, that a lot of what you say is true. What I am engaging in is a kind of a situational concept that, due to the historical realities of Russia and Western and Central Europe, due to a new kind of emotional mood that's sweeping the continent, due to a kind of recognition of decline.
So do you think this mood...
There is a chance, a strong chance, for something that is much more spiritual and much more in line with what I want to arise.
Let me confront
you. Maybe I'm engaging in wishful thinking. Fair enough.
Let me confront you with...
what I am arguing.
Okay, then allow me to confront you with a paradox. Okay? So... Okay. Would you say that this is an unconscious phenomena primarily, that this awakening?
Yeah, I could agree with that.
Okay, since it's primarily unconscious, because on the surface level, this is about universalism and globalism and Reddit and so on, liberalism. That's what we see on the surface. But you're saying that's just on the surface, and unconsciously, this is the awakening of the real European identity, right? The dilemma is this. The soft power of Europe, the power of Europe, the ability for Europe to have any type of influence or power in the international community when it comes to this event, precisely lies in this surface level globalism. If Europe were to say, this is just us, Europe, versus the East will fucking eat Europe alive. They have to pretend to be universal to maintain their imperial power. If they don't be universal anymore, how can you enforce your will over Africa and Asia and Latin America when you are just acting on behalf of your own interests. Then it's total war, right? And I don't think Europe's going to fare very well in a situation of complete total war versus what, 6 or 7 other billion people on Earth. It's not going to work. So they have to pretend to be universal to maintain the type of
it can work for a while. I mean, a few dozen people in London were administering India, to be honest. Secondly, in terms of the advancement towards the East, I mean, Germany was caught in Bismarck's nightmare, a pincer movement of the capitalist and communist forces united against it. I mean, again, I'm not endorsing
Russia,
national
China,
socialist Germany.
Iran, and we're going to have like a World War III where the allies are going to be like these 6 billion other, and this is the fantasy scenario, by the way, but Turkey, Iran, Russia, China, even India, Pakistan, they're all going to unite against an aggressive newfound
I don't worry
Europe.
about India or Pakistan, but I certainly worry about China. Yes, I want to avoid, like, one aspect of a Cold War and bifurcation is that you don't ultimately fight the hot war because it would be so immensely destructive that both sides are
Then
against it.
I'm
But
trying
I
to tell
more or
you.
less agree with you.
I'm trying to tell you.
I think there's going to be a new
Listen.
concept of the East. The
Okay,
East
listen.
Was the Soviet? Let me finish
This-
real quick.
this-
East was the Soviet Union. There's going to be a new East with basically China. That Chimerica arrangement, the iPhone designed in California, made in China. I think that
ending.
might be ending in my lifetime. It might be. And there might very well be a kind of new East-West division of the world. The sad thing of what Vladimir Putin has accomplished is that Russia is going to be the little brother to China in that scenario. And I don't wish that upon Russia.
I don't see that concretely because
join in with, us.
Concretely speaking, you're talking about a little brother, but China has never demonstrated it's going to encroach upon Russia's sovereignty. If China is more powerful than Russia, that doesn't mean it's strong-arming Russia into submission. It just means you have an alliance where with one that has 1.4.
I wouldn't want to be aligned with China. I mean,
well, that's your opinion.
Politically speaking, I mean, at the moment, the United States.
I'll tell you what I know from some of the Russian perspective is that I think Russians have fared better with the East than the kind of Teutonic genocidal Catholics that tried to forcibly convert them and attack them and engage in hostilities. I mean, the East is what has preserved Russia's unique Orthodox civilization. Why would Russia trust the West over them?
Well, that's fine, but you can be swallowed by the dragon too. I look, this is my personal opinion.
Okay.
I have affection for Russian culture. I would not want you all to be swallowed by the dragon.
I am not Russian.
I think there will be tremendous demographic, that is racial changes in Russia being a kind of little brother of the East. I don't wish that upon you.
Well,
because I actually have a lot of affection for Russia.
Well, you're talking about wishing. I genuinely pity the Western Europeans who are occupied and basically totally dominated by kind of this satanic American globalism, which is crushing their spirit, crushing their soul, suffocating them, introducing all manner of corruption, civilizational decay, and so on and so on. I mean, you're saying good luck to Russia.
It's actually not that bad.
I think it's pretty bad. I think it's pretty bad.
I agree with you in some kind of Spenglerian sense that we are just headed down the tubes. Like there's a certain kind of nihilistic death drive at the heart of the white race. I actually agree with you, and it's something that we need to confront. And there are a lot of different causes.
Don't you think this newfound militarization,
just claiming that America is this like horrifying hellscape and we're just suffocating Europeans
spiritually,
just so overstated.
Spiritually, yes.
I kind of agree. I look, I'm involved in a project of Aryan spiritual renewal. So
I didn't say anything about Aryan, but yeah,
well, I certainly wouldn't. I think Christianity is part of what you're describing. But
well, okay, so
I would not be promoting that for any white person.
Listen, my overall point is simply
Christianity is an utterly nihilistic religion at its very core.
I think the irony is you keep mentioning this word nihilism, but this kind of fascistic militarism is precisely based in what? Nietzschean nihilism, complete nihilism. end of
Nietzsche is not a nihilist. I mean,
yeah,
Nietzsche
but you
is
get
trying to
it's
fight nihilism.
yeah, that's the point, right? It's a vain. Nietzsche tried to fight it in vain. He couldn't do it. So that's the point.
If you believe that this world is a vale of tears and that nothing really matters and that the pure good is outside the material world and that one day we'll go to an afterlife and live forever,
This is this is the caricature of the caricature of the Christian position. This is not Christianity.
Caricature, sure.
This is some kind of not. No, what you're talking about, some kind of Gnostic heresy. Real Christian religion is about the dialectic of heaven and earth, about the otherworldly and the worldly, the moment of their meeting, right? And that's where meaning is.
Okay.
So, Mike, but this
I
is
think that's a better version of Christianity.
different philosophical dispute going on.
Still.
To rein it back, how can Europe find meaning in a combination of Reddit globalism plus militarism?
I don't agree with your premise that like European culture at this point is just simply Reddit.
I think so. I think precisely so.
Okay, that's fair enough. And I also have granted you that you are describing something that is very real. And I think this is in some ways a product.
All right, let's just find. Let's
in the sense that we're living our lives.
Okay, let's communicate it. Okay.
Not in the real
let's
world.
just make it
in the metaverse. I agree with you.
But let's make it more clear because when I ask for you,
nothing else in America is just absolutely
okay, sure. But when I ask you, where can we find the independent European kind of identity or consciousness or logos, you give me something too broad and too like ancient. Like I give you something very immediate and specific, the Reddit globalism.
I'll give you something that happened yesterday, and that's the rearmament of Germany.
Okay,
you can't have a civilization outside.
But you
violence.
have a kind of nihilistic view. You don't understand. Simply arming is not a logos. This is the arm of Reddit.
I agree. Of course, I agree with that.
This is Reddit arming itself.
It's a necessary precondition for. I wouldn't use the word. Logos means word. Of course, it also kind of means logic. Has a very Platonic and Christian association.
Okay, call it what you want, but
a spirit is what I would call it. Or
spirit,
a Geist,
sure.
German
Geist, okay.
But you can't capture that outside of the material necessity of fighting someone to the death. And so you must arm. You must be willing to
fighting to the death
life.
For purpose. It's always for purpose.
I saw something where I don't.
Purpose here is Reddit.
Bausch,
hold on.
Where you evoked Hegel and maybe Kojev is where you're getting it, but the master-slave dialectic. In that sense, I'm a Hegelian.
But the problem
you need to be willing to risk your own life.
Yes,
you need to arm yourself, to be willing to dominate.
Hold on.
If you were going to have any form of consciousness,
but
or spirit.
master-slave dialectic is not just based on biological survival. It's based on purpose, logos. What is the purpose of rearmament except an extension of Reddit globalism?
I get that. I think that's actually an astute criticism that you're making. Absolutely.
Because I don't see the purpose. I don't see the purpose.
That is an astute criticism that you have just made. What I am saying is that out of this new kind of, I use it on Twitter today, like mortality salience, that sense that we might all die in a world war, out of that new sense, that pressure, there could be a revival of a spirit that defines German and European people. And maybe I'm engaging in a little wishful thinking.
I will.
It has to start somewhere.
For the sake of the spirit of intellectual whatever, here's what I'll grant, okay?
Intellectual whatever, yeah.
Reddit globalism has the specific feature of a lack of cognizance of mortality. It's a view of kind of.
I agree.
We are immortal, right? We live forever. There's no sense of.
We live in cyberspace.
Yeah, there's no sense of, like, as Heidegger would put it, there's no cognizance of finitude, right? And finitude is what defines our being or our identity. Sorry. Finitude is what defines us. But here's the problem. What we are not seeing is finitude is not rediscovered in a complete thermonuclear like this threshold of just total annihilation or total war. Finitude takes a very specific particular form, not of the finitude of biological life specifically, but the finitude of a kind of geist or idea or state or determinate kind of logo. So that's the kind of that's the thing that must be finite in order for us to be human, right? Us being finite in the sense of like physical death doesn't have to necessarily mean it. You can look in Liberia with its civil war in the 90s, complete slaughters, endless slaughterhouse, bodies flying. This doesn't actually lead to any kind of awakening of Dasein or anything like that, right? So
what you're saying is very interesting, Hans, and it's actually surprising. And I think it's a very good critique of what I put forward. I would simply offer that out of this new kind of finitude, this new sense of our own mortality, this new sense that we're going to have to risk it.
But the problem
there is the foundation for a real geist is there.
But
that's what I'm suggesting.
The problem,
maybe I'm hopeful.
Yeah. But the problem is that it's not really a finitude, because it's a kind of, you see this also with this new digital Reddit culture, whatever, is that they do have a sense of extreme violence and extreme kind of sense of apocalypse and annihilation. Like, for example, with cancel culture, when someone's canceled, they're dead. There doesn't matter what happens to them, raped, killed, tortured, who cares, right? So that's not a real
canceled a few times.
That's not a real finitude, because it's simply, on the one hand, you have this type of kind of unconditional Reddit comfort and safety and identity, beyond the threshold of which is just complete negation, death, right? Finitude comes when you have negation of the negation, where it's not simply something, this empty universalism beyond the threshold of which is total negation. You have a determinate universalism beyond the threshold of which is a kind of sea of openness with which you can discover other particularities, have dialogue, something like that, right? So the problem is this rearmament and this newfound sense of like anxiety is a type of precisely a fanaticism perfectly compatible, not only compatible, but is an extension of Reddit globalism.
Okay. I simply don't agree with you, but I think I would tip my cap that you are making a very interesting and thoughtful criticism.
Okay.
And it's something I'm going to think about.
Okay. So, do you guys want to go into Q&A then?
Sure.
Okay. Let me pull up the ones that we do have. Okay. All right. So from Entropy, thank you for the super chat. From K Max McDonald, for both guests, do you both agree on Putin's motivations? What, in your view, is motivating this action against the Ukraine?
You can go first.
In my view, there's the recent context, which was the ceasefire violations and the continued shelling of Donetsk. Then there's also the long-term view, which is that Russia will not tolerate a Ukraine in NATO. It's not going to tolerate an anti-Russian power in Ukraine. Specifically because, and this is a lot of something people overlook, is that there's an element of geostrategic importance with Ukraine because of that Volgograd Strait. And if that's taken, it's the end of the Russian state as we know it.
Okay, apparently we now agree, because that is basically what I said in my opening statement. I mean, I think NATO expansion is a threat to Russia, as Putin understands Russia. But I think there's something actually, in fact, unique about Ukraine. And the threat of a German army marching to the Caspian is that would be encirclement, and that is simply intolerable. He will not accept that. So I think NATO expansion is a real thing, but it's actually, there's something unique about Ukraine.
Okay. So again, from K-Mac said, what is plan B for Putin? Say he takes over Ukraine in the next month. Does he stop there or try for another territory?
No, I don't foresee. I don't foresee Putin. People are trying to depict him as like a madman, a new Hitler who wants to just conquer for conquer's sake. It reflects a poor understanding of the nature of Russia's nature of its operation within Ukraine, as well as its broader geostrategic interests in the region.
Do you want me to repeat that question, Richard?
No, I heard it. I don't think he has further territorial ambitions. There is that question of like the Baltic region or something, or Moldova. Or, I mean, I'm not so sure about that. I don't think this war has gone swimmingly for Russia. I think there's a very good chance that Russia will win. And I think there's also, my prediction is that we're going to end up with a kind of divided Ukraine. There's i.e. a German situation, and that's my speculation, I would say. But I don't think this has been a knockout war that is over in 3 days. I think it's actually going to be much more of a slog, and I do think that Russia has a very strong chance of winning. But I don't think Putin quite factored in the just insane enthusiasm and unanimity of the Redditors and also the governments. And so I think it's going to be a slog, but I don't think expanding beyond that is going to be possible, even if he wanted to do it. And I'm not sure he does.
Okay. All right. Hear myself echo a little bit. Okay, and also from Entropy, from PAX2, he said, and thank you for the super chat, he said, Two has, how is the West run by Anglo-Saxon elites? Even identifying as Anglo-Saxon will get a politician attacked by the entire media. We clearly haven't been run by Anglo-Saxons in a long time.
That's more of a cultural feature that's actually particular to Anglo-Saxon civilization, of denial of one's own particularity in favor of a kind of universal identity. But when you look at the meat and potatoes of the history of the institutions that rule us and govern us, we can see continuity between the British Empire and the United. British Empire didn't just go away, right? It changed its form. So you have the City of London, financial institution, you have the World Bank, you have things like this, and these are very determinate, specific connections that trace their lineage to the British Empire. So this is what rules us, right? These are the people who are the linchpin and masters of our political and economic system.
I don't fully disagree with that. I mean, I think we have a Bretton Woods system created in 1944, even before the end of the war, a kind of global currency system. I think it's also a fair statement to say that the United States kind of inherited the legacy of the British Empire as it began to fall in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I think that's all fair. I don't think you should, at the same time, deny that there is a new player in town. There was a lot of collaboration between Jewish Zionist forces in the British Empire. After all,
Just to be clear, I'm on Twitch right now. I obviously disagree with that, but we're not gonna be able to argue with that. But I just want to express I completely disagree with that view.
Question for Richard. What are your thoughts on the writings of Comrade Number 3?
That's just a community meme. That's just a community meme. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is either. Fuki, thank you so much for the super chat. Fuki saved the day, by the way. You guys all suck. And he said, enjoy that crypto cash by Bitcoin. Thank you for that. And then let me go to Odyssey. hold on. So from the thin red line, the Western Organization of OSCE recognized the election of Yanukovych in 2010. So they were dishonest when they recognized the coup of 2014.
That's probably for Haas.
You're saying the OSCE recognized? Is that what they said?
Yeah.
The OSCE recognized the other guy, and then they were just. He's asking me, were they dishonest for recognizing the post-coup government?
Yeah, I believe so.
I don't know if it's a matter of dishonesty, but it calls into question what the basis of recognizing a legitimate government actually is. Where does that come from? I think that's it.
From Chris Morlack, thank you for the super chat. He said, question for Spencer. What's your Twitch username? I'll buy you a subscription. Sounds like you have some doubts about Trotskyism. We have free support sessions. What was that meant for Spencer or Haas?
I kind of jokingly said I was a Trotskyist at the beginning. No, I'm not on Twitch. I've never attempted to be on Twitch. I don't play video games outside of chess. So. But I don't know if I should stream on Twitch. Who knows?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. All right, from Anonymous. Thank you for the super chat. He said, Richard, why is being a Nazi a good thing?
What?
Why is being...
Yeah, I have no idea what they're doing. And then we have from, hold on, let me just refresh this. All right, so from the Thin Red Line said it is not Europe's interest to be hostile to Russia. Okay, thank you for the super chat. And then Prevailing West said, thanks for a great debate, guys. Thank you for that. Let me see if we're missing anything. Oh, wait, yes, we are. Okay. So from KMax, he said, McDonald said, when Putin invaded Crimea, his popularity soared. This time, the media reports he is not. How do both guests see the difference between Crimea and this action?
I have not seen evidence of a deterioration of the public's approval of Putin. I think it went from 60% to 71% last time I checked of confidence in the president of Russia. So I think his numbers are up, actually. Again, I think in the you don't see this in the Western social media, of course.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, after I believe popularity increased, and weirdly his relationship with the West got a bit better after the 2008 strike on Georgia, and there's certainly a lot of anti-Putin rhetoric in the media, and there were sanctions of some kind after 2014, but nothing like what we're facing today. I also agree that a lot of foreign policy is determined by domestic issues. It's determined by shoring things up. The public, at the end of the day, likes wars or likes winning wars. I am not so sure about what's happening now. I mean, the level of sanctions are unprecedented. I mean, Switzerland did not do what they did to Hitler, and they're now doing this to Russia. I mean, that's pretty remarkable in terms of freezing assets. There is a asset freeze of the central bank, so you're attacking the ruble itself. I mean, no flights are coming in to the United States, Canada, or Western Europe. I mean, what has happened is really dramatic. There is going to be pain for the average citizen, and I think Putin is on a knife's edge in a way that he has never been in his entire 20-year career.
I think you're muted.
Son of a bitch! Every freaking time! So annoying! Every time. All right. whatever. All right, so we are all caught up on that, and we can do closing statements and final thoughts since Richard went first. Then, Haz, if you want to go first for closing statements, you can.
So for my final thoughts, so in the current situation, I think the overall takeaway for how I view Russia's intervention in Ukraine is that this is an impetus for all alternative global forces, Islamic in the Middle East, everywhere in the world, India, America, the West even, the truckers in Canada. This is a form of rebellion against the current global establishment and the current status quo across the board. It's not simply a conflict between nations. It's a more fundamental type of insurrection against the Davos agenda, the Great Reset, etc., etc., etc. So in my view, it has world historical significance as a big nail in the coffin of the American empire, and the ushering in of a truly and also unpredictable multipolar age, right? I don't know if we're entering an age of the Cold War's bipolar age. I think it's going to be a truly multipolar age. I think we have to adjust to this, and I think only the West has maintained this kind of neuroticism of just one universal world community and civilization.
And before you give your closing, we did get one more question for Richard. Thank you for the super chat from PAX2. He said, to Richard, can we really blame Putin for his aggressiveness when the West has slammed the door in his face at every turn? So if you want to answer that, and then you can give your closing.
No, I mean, I acknowledge that at the beginning. I think Russia has real strategic objectives at play, and NATO expansion is one of them. And so I understand Putin's objectives, and I'm not going to moralize about them. I'm not going to claim that he's evil, for one thing. Now, there's a lot of evil that's going to come from this war, and just in terms of loss of life and nastiness and death of innocence. But I don't think I understand his geopolitical perspectives, and I will not moralize about them. This conflict is in a way kind of situated me. I have an understanding of Putin, but I also understand my own situation as a Westerner and as an American. And I am going to embrace that finitude or particularity of it. I think we are to a certain extent entering a new age of multipolarity, but I think this is going to more prominently feel like we're returning to the 20th century. And that all of the questions that came out of American unipolarity, humanitarian intervention in the 90s, regime change wars in the 2000s, the latter I opposed in my small way as a young adult in 2003 and 2004. We are entering a different type of mindset. Europe is in a different position than it was at the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the First Cold War, when it was largely in rubble and in a state of humiliation. And I think Europe is already playing a much stronger role than it did at that time. So I think there's going to be some real significant differences in this neo-Cold War. And I hope that this new kind of mortality, this sense of destruction, the sense of death, this fear is going to awaken a spirit among Americans and Europeans that we've lost over the past 30 years. And that Reddit age, which Haz really, I think, very accurately described, might be in the rearview mirror, and we're entering a new age of great politics. And I think that's a very good thing.
All right. Well, thank you guys both for doing this. This was a fun debate. This was a needed debate, and I think a little bit unexpected on some of the positions. So I thought it was good.